I'm Brian Zane, and welcome to the Actor's Nervous System. Today, I'm joined by Jenna Pacelli, also known as the holistic neuroscientist. Jenna is a licensed therapist and neuroscientist whose work focuses on trauma, the body, and nervous system regulation. Jenna, thanks so much for being here today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Happy to be here. Yeah.
So before we dive into your story, could you give our listeners a sense of what your work looks like day to day?
Oh, like a day in the life.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's shifted a lot. I moved abroad a couple years ago. I live in London now, and I am doing more and more content creation. I used to see like 35 clients a week as a therapist years ago, and I loved that. And also it wears on you eventually. 30, no therapist really sort of stays at 35 people a week for too long. So, as I got more into my own body, I was able to sort of notice my own limits there. And I also have an autoimmune disorder, and I have to really manage that. I have a couple of things that are sort of connected to that, and I get I'll have neurological symptoms if I'm not careful. And so I've really learned the hard way about overdoing it. And so a lot of my day-to-day life looks like I prioritize sleep like you wouldn't believe. Although I am working on going to bed earlier, I will sleep as much as I need. And then I focus a lot on eating anti-inflammatory foods. That's the more am trained in neuroscience, like the more I prioritize and understand the value of reducing inflammation throughout the body. And we can talk as much as you want about that in terms of if we want to regulate our minds and our nervous systems and actually be present, part of that is how inflamed are we? And a certain level of inflammation is normal and okay. Inflammation is a good thing to a certain degree, but we want to be managing stress and inflammation tend to go hand in hand quite literally at the molecular level. So I focus on that, and then I do a lot of content creation and thinking about what my audience is needing to learn, and then I do one-on-one work and I do group work, helping people heal from complex trauma, complex PTSD, dissociative patterning, and toxic family systems, or I would just say kind of the intergenerational pattern of emotional immaturity that runs throughout most of society. And I help people heal from that through connection to themselves. And then usually when they do that, they become deeply present and much more, how do I, what's the best word for this? Like they become more successful, frankly, right? Like the more present we are and the more embodied we are, the better you get at your life, and it becomes easier to be better at your life. And I'm no exception. So I guess that's kind of what a day looks like. Oh, and I also, try to exercise too because it's really good for your brain. um, but I'm really careful about that too in terms of my energy levels and where I'm at with my body, and I try to not overdo it too. So I'm quite aware of the intensity of the work, the exercise that I do too. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's great.
Okay.
Yeah, no, it's so great. The like the integration of everything, and
Yeah.
when you were talking about inflammation, like yeah, I can resonate with that, and I think I try to eat nutritiously, but there's
Yeah.
like some kind of vicious cycle sometimes where it's like you're stressed out, and then you want to eat something quick,
Yeah.
and then your body and like the whole connection between the mental health and the physical health, it's just so important.
Yeah. It's really undervalued too. It's really underestimated, I think, by a lot of people. And so that's why I call myself, it's like the holistic neuroscientist. It's like we're not just a brain that's detached from the body. It's like you're a brain in your body, and you're also a whole person, and you have a psyche and blood flowing through you and lymph and all these things. It's like we have to take care of all these things. We can't just come at it from one, and Western medicine is often this way where they're sort of siloed from away from each other, trying to solve problems that like need a holistic approach. So, yeah.
Yeah, and that's something that's kind of been interesting about my journey with acting training and finding this technique that is more about bringing all those things together and actually
Hey,
like not just the head, not just, not doing all these things
Yeah.
separately, but actually it taught me more to listen to my intuition. And I think it's affecting my entire life, basically.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Like bringing it more together in a whole more holistic way. Because I think you were saying there's kind of siloed acting techniques too.
Yeah. I think the main acting technique is the Stanislavski
Mm.
technique. And that's kind of approaching everything from the brain and like analyzing, deciding what kind of who my character is, deciding, oh, is my character what is my character trying to do to the other person, and like you
Okay.
write down all these like verbs, like I'm trying to do this. So it's like all
Mm.
about action. At the end of it, it's Stanislavski was like at the end of his book, he's like, and then you have to kind of work with the subconscious as well. And Demidov, who worked with him, was like, well, how are they going to do that?
Right.
It like I think you need to like take away the entire first part of the book and just do the
Yes.
subconscious. And they disagreed and got into a fight. And Demidov created his own system that is all about using the subconscious and not pre-deciding, but like
Yeah.
really just letting the subconscious take over in the moment. Your creativity take over, which
It's
is
such an interesting point because there's a lot of that that happens in the therapy industry in
mm,
this in kind of trying to treat trauma, for instance. It's like they're like I'm trained in EMDR and brain spotting, and you go into these trainings and they do exactly what Stanislav did.
Stanislavski.
Stanislavski did, where they say it's do this, 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 and this, and then the rest is somatic. And I think when people say that, they think that their method is somatic or it's subconscious because the somatic work and the subconscious work are very similar. I would say that they're basically the same thing. It's like
Mm,
when people say that, they're saying and the rest is XYZ. They don't actually know how to do that. They just are saying it because it sounds good, but if you knew how to do it, you would then be able to talk about it and
right.
teach it, you know?
Yeah.
So I have a similar kind of beef with some of these things that are more evidence-based that, or are touted as more evidence-based that, yeah, I
Yeah.
question. Yeah.
Yeah, and Stanislavski would kind of say to the actors, like, okay, you've worked on this, you know everything, and now just forget it all and just like and see what happens in the moment. It's like, how do I do that?
Wow.
I like dissected the character, I dissected the scene. I've been doing it this way. Like
Yeah.
I've been using control the whole time. So now how do I all of a sudden just release control? You just have to
Interesting.
practice. So Demidov's technique is all about practice, daily practice of releasing control and allowing your body
Right.
freedom to do whatever it wants.
Okay. Interesting. That makes sense to me.
All right. So to go back to your time doing wilderness
Yeah.
therapy, and for people who've never heard of that before, what actually is wilderness therapy?
Okay. Okay. So, first of all, if you're some people are familiar with it, some people are not. So for the folks that are not, I'll start there. Wilderness therapy is, how do I describe this? It's using the wilderness, it's using the outdoors as a method of change for at-risk youth and young adults. There are different types of wilderness therapy, and the one that I did is the most hardcore, I would say, which is the primitive nomadic style, where you carry everything on your back and you move from campsite to campsite. There are some wilderness therapy programs that are more of like a what do they call it? Base camp model, where you sort of live in a yurt. It doesn't quite have the same, it's useful, but I would say the primitive nomadic style it's extremely challenging. And we would use people's responses, reactions, ways of being moving through wilderness as our metaphor for their life. And it's extremely effective in the sense that you can learn a lot about people based on their response to difficulty and hardship. The wilderness therapy industry has changed a lot since I was in it because there were some programs. I don't know which ones they were. I didn't hear about them, but there were programs that got shut down because people claimed to be abused at some of these places. Now, did that happen? Potentially. I don't know. It didn't happen at our program, but oftentimes too, what you would see, well, let me get into that in a moment. So, wilderness therapy as a whole is was kind of like the last resort for a lot of families when their child was very deeply struggling. They'd already been in and out of residential treatment, like at the hospital, let's say a psychiatric hospital, or they'd already been through years and years of therapy already, or they were behaving in very dangerous ways. Okay. And what became very clear to me in that work was that these children, a lot of the time, were the identified patient of the family. And so I worked as a wilderness field instructor. So I was out there for 8 days at a time, living with them in blizzards. And if you're in the US, like 110-degree heat or 40 degrees Celsius, um, down to blizzards. And we're doing therapy through all of it and processing their reaction to, wow, I'm freezing, or not freezing. Nobody was like in danger of freezing or overheating. We were always kind of managing that. But wow, it's cold and I'm uncomfortable, right? And for a lot of kids who had been sitting inside in modern society and never getting outside, never seeing the sun, which, by the way, from a neuroscientific perspective, getting your circadian rhythms healthy is wildly helpful in terms of supporting your mental health. So that I think did a lot of the work for us. But, what happens when we live a simple life, when you're eating simple foods like beans and rice and vegetables and fruit and, cutting out a lot of the sort of conveniences of modern society. And then you get a lot of feedback and data on these kids. Okay. But what I would see is that many of them, when I became the therapist, so the field instructors are out there for 8 days at a time, backpacking with them, and they are implementing the treatment plan that this therapist has written. So when I was straight out of college or uni in the UK, so university, I'm trying to speak to people because they're all over and they have different names for these things. But when I was straight out of college, I went into wilderness therapy as a field instructor, then left, went back and went to graduate school. Then they hired me back as a therapist. So then I was writing the treatment plans for these kids. Okay. And the time that you are not working with kids in wilderness, you are out of the field. So you do 2 days in the field doing the treatment or doing therapy with them and then handing it off to the field staff. Right. And then the other 2 days or 3 days a week, I was working with the parents about here's what I'm seeing in your kid. Here's where I'm kind of positioning that within the macrocosm of your family. And here's the work that you need to do, mom and dad, right? Or whoever the parents were. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times, this is how I get kind of a little bent out of shape about the things that I talk about, because so much of the time, these parents needed to go to wilderness, not the kid.
Yeah.
And so I learned how to work with really dysfunctional family systems with a lot of codependency, a lot of all sorts of mental illness, running the gamut of that, all sorts of substance abuse disorders, all sorts of anything that you can think of. We were working with the exception of like psychosis and homicidal behavior, right? We pretty much took everything else. And so I was out there at 22 years old, 23 years old, working with these kids that like had washed out of every other place in the country. Like they would send them to us. And it was sort of like, okay, like let's get creative here. And then so wilderness is this very powerful modality of treatment when done right can really change people's lives. But what I would also see is they would go to wilderness. We were kind of like the ER of right, like this person's very much at risk, and psych hospital can't hold them this long. They need really severe, really intensive treatment. And then they would go to aftercare is kind of what we called it for another like 12 to 18 months after that. So they'd maybe spend 3-4 months with us. Usually on average, my average stay for my kids were like 4 months. And then they would go to aftercare. And depending on how much work the parent had done on themselves in parallel to their child was almost like a causation, like it wasn't just like a correlation. It was like causation. It was like these kids would go home and they would either get better and keep getting better, or they would completely revert back to what was going on, depending on how much work the parent did on themselves. So that's what wilderness is. Did that answer your question? I
Yeah.
feel like
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
it's hard to describe. And I think, the last thing I'll say about that is that it's gotten a really bad rap recently because kids have claimed to be abused at some of these programs. And I've seen some of these documentaries. And this might be, get me canceled on Reddit or whatever by these these kids, but some of the kids wouldn't complete treatment. And that's kind of like if you didn't finish the full course of treatment in wilderness therapy, it's kind of like taking half the course of antibiotic. It doesn't work. You can't just, I'm going to plug this in here. You um you can't just do part of it and then go home. Some kids would go home or they get pulled out early because parents didn't want to keep working. It would really challenge the parents on a lot of their stuff because their kids out of the house, they're having to really look at themselves. They can't blame the kid for all the chaos that's going on at home now because the kid's out of the house, right? And so the documentaries that I've seen, and I watched it with some of my other wilderness therapist friends, and we were just kind of decoding what some of these kids were saying. And it was like, oh, one person saying they didn't feed us. That's never true. Usually what's going on is we were feeding them healthy food and they didn't want to eat it. So then they go onto these documentaries and say, oh, they were abusing us and they never didn't feed us. I don't know anywhere that wasn't feeding their kids. Or they were, and again, I'm not going to say that people weren't abused. I can just speak for the program I was at. They had ample amounts of food, ample amounts of water. They didn't have to hike if it was too hot or if it was too cold. It's just uncomfortable. And so some of these kids, again, they've gone out, and Paris Hilton is one of them. She started this whole thing, and I don't know if she's abused or not, but it was like she kind of started this whole movement. And now the wilderness therapy industry has been so dialed back. I don't know where these kids are going to go. And it's quite sad because probably a lot of them would end up either in juvenile hall or incarcerated, or they will end up, I don't know, just cycling in and out of the psych hospital and not really getting better. So I do have a bit of an opinion about it. And when I watch some of these documentaries, I'm like, there's a lot that's being really wildly misinterpreted by kids who didn't complete treatment. So then they tend to feel really resentful about what happened, essentially.
That reminds me that there's this book by Sarah Schulman called Conflict is Not Abuse. And it's all about how in society, a lot of times when people get uncomfortable by things, or if and we're not taught how to deal with conflict, they take on like I'm being abused, and they do it because they get community from it from other people.
I'll write that down.
It's a super interesting book.
Interesting. Conflict.
Conflict is Not Abuse by Sarah Schulman. And like you were saying, I'm not discounting. I don't know what happened.
Yeah.
It's not to say that some people weren't abused, but
I think it could have happened for sure. Some of the staff at some, especially these residential places that were not wilderness, would hire local. A lot of these programs are in Utah. They would hire kind of local, uneducated, very dogmatically religious staff from the local area. And I think there were issues with that. That were legitimate in some programs in these other residential treatment centers. We wouldn't call ourselves a residential treatment, call ourselves just wilderness. So I'm not discounting it. If somebody says they're abused, but yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
All right. And then, I'd like to hear how that kind of eventually led you towards somatic experiencing and brain spotting and neuroscience. Work.
I actually I practiced yoga quite religiously for all of my 20s. I went through really pretty severe trauma in college, a couple of severe traumas in college, and I found yoga. And so I already had this sort of mindset of a holistic approach in my work. And when they hired me back as a wilderness therapist, let me rewind a little bit. When I went through graduate school the first time, I asked for a supervisor who was trained in trauma, and they just happened to pair me with my now mentor, who I've worked with now for probably 10 years. He knows me in and out, and he was trained in somatic experiencing. And it made a lot of sense to me, though, the way that he described it. And because it's such a naturalistic approach, it made a lot of sense in how they work. And so I ended up, he just sort of worked with me in that way, helping me start to actually get in my body. Because even though I'd done all this yoga, I had a ton of unhealed trauma that would cause me to dissociate a bit while I was doing yoga and meditation. So part of my work, especially in my membership and in my deeper group work, is doing trauma-informed mindfulness so that people aren't dissociating. Because a lot of clinicians are not trained to track dissociation at a physiological level, and you cannot treat trauma if somebody's chronically dissociated. And so you can't, and I actually think a lot of the population is more dissociated than we think. Um, so I was doing yoga, and it helped me manage on the day to day. So I had to do like an hour of yoga and an hour of meditation to kind of get my pants on in the morning and brush my teeth. Like that, it took that amount of kind of what I now know as a kind of overmodulation of the neocortex, which is kind of control. Going back to the first actor, I keep forgetting his name, for like kind of like this like kind of intense neocortical control. Um, that's great as a short-term band-aid, at least in trauma work. I won't speak for actors, but it's a great short-term band-aid in terms of keep getting somebody regulated and like through the day. And so I went back to wilderness, and I was implementing some of these somatic things that I had been learning and practicing with my supervisor mentor. And I started getting a lot of clients came to me. They would get referred to me by consultants who these clients had been through traditional talk therapy. They'd been through EMDR. They'd been through brain spotting. They'd been through these things that people say are somatic even. And they were coming to me super dissociated, not making any progress. I'm like, what's going on? And they're like, kind of like a balloon that's floating away. And I'm like, whoa, come on back down to earth. Let's bring you back online, because you've been dissociating. The person hasn't been tracking it, and they're just doing bilateral stimulation, which is, I basically have not made a career, just sort of happened because I was doing these other things that I was cleaning up a lot of the messes that nobody talks about that happen with EMDR and talk therapy. And so I just happened to have these skills, and then the consultants would hear about it and be like, oh, let's, send that kid to Jenna or whatever. And I'm like, let's help you get into your body, which is called interoception. And it's a term in neuroscience that, yeah. And so that's kind of how I got into somatics, right? Into somatic experiencing. Yeah. And then it just super helped me with my own self and my own body. And I finally went to the training after doing it for a while, just with my mentor and through experience, and then actually got trained in it. And it was like, it opened up a whole bunch of developmental trauma, attachment-based trauma, stuff I thought I had dealt with, because I'd thought hard enough about it or whatever and cried enough about it, but it really wasn't the same thing.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Was there kind of like one moment or case that like convinced you more that like talk therapy wasn't enough as opposed to somatic?
Wow.
Or was it more like gradual, just?
I think it was kind of gradual. It was also being in my own talk therapy, and the therapist asking me the same question over and over again, which is, why can't you hold boundaries with this narcissist? She didn't call this person a narcissist. She knew this person, but she was like, why can't you hold boundaries with XYZ person? And like, 90 minutes of therapy every week for 4 years with somebody asking you that, and it's not getting better. And eventually I just threw up my hands and I was like, I don't know. That's why I'm here. Like, please, dear God, help me. Like, us talking about it isn't helping me. And now I feel shamed about it. It's like, why can't I do this? Well, you can't do it because you're not in your body and nobody knows that. Right. So that was a moment for me where I just sort of was like, this is getting me nowhere. It helped me understand like what's going on in my environment, but she wasn't acknowledging. I don't know if she wasn't trained enough. I think a lot of clinicians aren't really quite trained enough to, at least back then, to identify narcissism or emotional immaturity and name it as that. And I know that people feel it's an overused term, but I think that we just have an epidemic of emotional immaturity, and the severe end of that is narcissism.
Hmm.
So, anyway, that's in a whole nother rabbit hole.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that was maybe the moment. I've also had interesting moments with EMDR where people were really wildly harmed, really, really severely harmed by it because it desensitized them so much. It's in the name, right? Eye movement, desensitization, and reprogramming or reprocessing. And
Right.
it's desensitization is in the name. And we don't want to desensitize people from things that they need to feel things about. Your bodily sensations and your emotions are giving you signals about your environment. And it's not about desensitizing yourself from that. It's about learning to interpret those signals in an accurate way
Hmm.
or in enough of it because there's interoceptive sensibility and there's interoceptive accuracy. So it's like how accurate do I think I am about my bodily signals and how accurate am I actually? And there's still debate in the field about how to measure all of these things and study them, but it's a great kind of inroad into more of our somatic
Yeah, that's
work.
super interesting. It makes me think again of the Demidov technique because
Yeah.
something is
Mm.
daily scales
Mm.
where for like 10 or 15 minutes I'll just be by myself, and one of the things I'm doing is just whatever I feel like doing, I follow that. Like whatever
Yes.
small automatic movements I feel like doing, whatever movements, and then I pay attention to how that affects my thoughts, how that affects my emotions. And there are ways to do this where I'll start with the emotion, see what emotion am I feeling, what movements does that make me feel like doing, what thoughts does that trigger, and then also start with thoughts and do it that way. And then another thing we do
Interesting.
is to just look up like a random sensation. I'll have like a list of sensations, so it'll be like hot, cold,
Yes.
different things, and I'll just like say it in my head, and then just whatever that triggers, whatever that makes me do, I'll just do it in the moment. So it's like training ourselves to be more in tune with our with what you were talking about, with like my emotion, my movement, my body, and
Yes.
that because it's a reflex, and
Yes.
if you're training that every day as an actor, then it will feel second nature to do that when you're actually on stage or in front of the camera.
I love this so much. I've been wanting to take acting lessons. I don't know if I told you that, but I like
Oh no, oh that's so cool.
because I think I watch film and I see TV and I really appreciate it as an art form.
Hmm.
And I watch these things and and maybe you can tell me what you think this means, but I have this, and maybe the writers are kind of, and the editors are priming me to like know what's going to happen next, but I'm always predicting the next thing.
Hmm.
And I don't know what that is, but I feel like there's so much overlap. Like what you just said is basically doing somatic experiencing and kind of like a foundational level. It's like people need to learn different words, sensation words, and then follow their different channels of internal experience, whether it's emotion, sensation, imagery, movements the body wants to make, and thoughts or meaning that you're making of it. So we have
Hmm.
these five channels that we talk about in somatic experiencing, and it's so similar to what you just said that it's
Wow.
so interesting. It's such a strong overlap between the two. Um, and I find like the more connected I am to myself, the more I watch film and I'm like, why do I keep doing that? I don't know what it means.
Yeah,
Yeah. So,
that's great. If you ever want, Andre, who was my mentor, he's the one who found the Demidov technique because it was like
okay.
it was gone for like 70 years. It was completely gone, and my professor in grad school,
Yeah.
Andre Malayev Babel, um, discovered the text. He translated it with another. He's Russian, and he translated it with another Russian former student of Demidov's, and released the book. And he's like the one who revived the technique.
Wow.
But he does do online classes if you're ever interested.
Amazing.
He does a
Yeah.
Zoom
I,
class, and he goes to London once every summer usually to do an
oh,
in person class as well.
oh, cool. Okay. I'll have
Yeah,
to look. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well,
Yeah, he's
totally. Go
yeah,
ahead. Go
the
ahead.
Demidov Association website
Okay.
has
Okay. I'll have to have you send that to me.
Yeah, I will. Yeah.
Okay.
I wanted to talk about presence. I mean,
Yes.
it's kind of what we were just talking about. Like, but when you work with people, do you see something that resembles what artists call presence, that feeling
Yeah.
of being fully here versus watching yourself from the outside?
I love this question so much. I saw this question come through when you sent it to me. I was so excited.
Oh, great.
I am obsessed with that. It is the best thing about this work. And it becomes my experience of this from a somatic perspective is that it becomes a spiritual experience.
Hmm.
And the because so many people are walking around not present, but they don't realize they're not present because you oftentimes you need some feedback about what you're doing in your own body and your own brain to get back into the body. So I have an actor friend who was in one of the SE trainings with me when I was assisting, and she does acting. And she talked about an acting class where this is maybe getting a little off topic, but it sort of it's I'm trying to describe what it's like, but she
It's okay.
kept wiggling her pinky finger
Hmm.
and didn't realize. I guess I do have a point to this. And the acting teacher came over and just put her hand or their hand on her pinky finger to stop the fidgeting. And she burst into tears.
Hmm.
And I think this is, and we laughed about that because it's such a somatic experiencing thing where when you stop, when you learn to track yourself enough such that you can notice the urges before as they're arising, pause, wait on them. Don't go into it. I do this all the time with people. It's like when you notice, oh, I want to like wiggle my leg or something. Most people are not even realizing that they're doing that, right? And you pause them. And this is often why we need some feedback in the beginning to say, hey, I'm seeing this, and they're not even realizing it, right? It's hard to do this ourselves, especially if there's a lot of dissociation going on or disconnection from self. So getting the feedback, which is, hey, notice this thing. And as you notice the urge, I want you to not do it. And then, and then delay the urge. And then when you delay the urge, then do the thing that you had the urge to do, but do it at 10% of the speed. And what you're going to get with that is the unprocessed stuff, I'll just say stuff, that the brain and body have not had the capacity to deal with. This is also how you build people's capacity to be with bigger nervous system states. And I would say actors are a great example of having to hold all sorts of different nervous system states
Hmm.
that aren't their own even,
Yeah.
and it,
Which is a lot.
it's a lot, right?
Yeah.
And it's so interesting that you reach out to me too, because I've worked with actors, I've dated actors, I've sort of been in that world, like, but sort of from a, I don't know, oblique way.
Yeah.
And I was at a meditation retreat, and this woman worked for Disney at the time, and she was their like DEI or something. I can't remember what she was. Well, I can't remember her role, but she said, "Do you want to come to Disney to work with my actors who are having to play really traumatic roles?" And I was like, yeah. And then then they went into like, I think there was like a writer strike or something, and then they didn't have funding, and then she left or something. So it didn't happen. But it was such an interesting thing to consider, which is, or like the thing that happened. Who is the person that was unfortunately killed in, I think it was New Mexico at the Netflix
Oh, the
a few years ago?
the
Because they,
Alec Baldwin thing.
yes, the
Is that what
Alec
you're talking
Baldwin
about?
thing.
Yeah.
Yes. It's like that's traumatic,
Yeah.
obviously, right?
Yeah.
But not only that, it's like she was saying, or like my people of my actors of color, for instance, who are having to play slaves.
Yeah.
Are you kidding? Or like white people having to play slave owners. Horrible. Like
Yeah.
I watched 12 Years a Slave when I was in graduate school, and we were talking a lot about oppression and racism, and I had an absolute meltdown. Like I'll never forget it. And I was like screaming in my apartment in San Francisco with rage and grief about what white people did to slaves. And it's all connected, right? All of these things are connected, which is like, how am I supposed to be with these really big roles, for instance? Um, and then be okay,
Yeah.
right? It's like this is a very like it's a serious thing that you guys do, and it's like this is the and so how do you stay present with your internal experience about that? And so my sense of this is like this: the deeper people get, and the better they get at tracking their own experience, they start getting spirit guides coming in, ancestors coming in to support them, imagery of their life, imagery of past lives. Like I know it sounds woo-woo, maybe people don't believe in that, but like the stuff I've seen in this work, I can't make it up. And I'm not telling people any of this. I'm not saying, hey, maybe a spirit guide's coming in. I'm not like a Reiki person. I'm just supporting them in being present with their own experience on a moment by moment basis. And then all these other things start to sort of arise from that.
Yeah.
So, and a totally kind of separate example, but connected as well, is I've had a number of clients do, like I had one client, I'll just, without naming obviously any identifying details, but she was struggling with taking her LSAT for law school and not getting the score she wanted. And she'd taken the test numerous times, and we worked together to help her regulate herself and stay and to stop. And she was also misinterpreting her bodily signals such that it sent her into a panic about failure. And as soon as we sort of got like took the basically got her neocortex offline such that she could be in the deeper parts of her brain and be more present, aced it, got into her dream school.
Wow.
I've had a number of people do that. Another client of mine was able to like be, and I'm not saying this to brag. I'm just saying like this is what presence does. It's not even me. It's just when humans can be in contact with themselves and they're not like freaking out or reacting about their own internal experience, which is what the Buddha taught 2,500 years ago, by the way, and the Gnostic Christians and all these people, all these spiritual teachers have been saying the same thing, right, in different language for fucking like thousands of years, right? It's all the same thing. That's what we're doing, right? And it's like that, like people who are like another client I was going to say is like, is he he's like, I swear doing this work helped me get a 5-figure bonus at work
Wow.
because I was finally able to stand up for myself. Yeah. Things like that happen all the time. People getting into graduate school. So we could say it's like there's this kind of woo-woo side of it that is deeply spiritual and connected to all things everywhere and all of Jung's archetypes. It's like we that's real.
Yeah. Yeah.
All of that's real. And then also on the kind of more practical, materialistic side, it's like people make more money and they get into grad school and like change their career. So it's like this is what presence does. And it's why I'm like so obsessed with it because it's why like I'll be in tears with people watching them heal and grow and bloom and like not need their, they've been like chronically depressed and suicidal their whole life and finally kind of getting some life force back.
Yeah.
So presence happens when you learn to be with your own internal experience and not run away from it, but on a moment by moment by moment basis. And there's a lot of traditions that teach it the wrong way, which is do this thing when you feel dysregulated. Oh, you feel anxious? Do alternate nostril breathing. Oh, you feel stress? Go cold plunge. These are not treatments. These are Band-Aids. They regulate you. They might reduce inflammation potentially, but they're not actually getting into what people are doing in response to themselves in every single moment of their lives. If I feel that every time I'm angry, I need to do alternate nostril breathing to get rid of that, that's not presence.
Right.
Right? If
Yeah.
I'm anxious and now every time I do that, I've got to take some medication. I'm not poo-pooing medication. People need it sometimes, but if I'm kind of maybe overly reliant on that, I am now doing what happened to me in my childhood where parts of me were not loved
Mm. Mm.
or I parts of me are not acceptable. So it's about really, really seriously committing to how do I come into presence with myself such that no part of me goes unseen, unloved, unsupported. And as soon as I do that, I can do pretty much anything else
Right.
because I'm not running from myself. So even all these things that get touted as really useful, it's like I have to train people out of that all the time. Even people coming in, they're therapists, they're yoga teachers, they'll come into somatic experiencing trainings and I'm assisting and teaching them. And I'm like, you got to stop with the fucking breath work.
Yeah.
Like you're doing the thing, like stop, like
Yeah.
right now. Like you noticed what just happened right there? And they're this on the surface, they look super calm and regulated, but I can see they're just off in la la land. It's not the same thing. And so I have to interrupt people in that process. Speaking of your earlier thing of like, dissociation and disconnection, it's like they're doing it, but they just do it in more skillful ways the more work they've done on themselves.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that it's like it along the lines of Jung. It's like the shadow work kind of like
Yes.
that a lot of people are afraid to do, and
Yeah.
but that's always the answer, right?
It's always the answer.
Like Dorothy, there's no place like home. Like it's always inside us, right?
That's right. That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was super interesting, and two of the things I wanted to talk about. One was when you were talking about spirituality. I mean,
Yeah.
that is like that's the thing about Demidov's technique is
Mm.
it is saying that acting and art is a spiritual act.
Hmm.
And this might have been one of the reasons why it was suppressed in the Soviet Union, because it was all about materialism, and what he was talking about was kind of considered not okay.
Hmm.
Um, but so we have like a person who started an acting technique who was a doctor, a psychologist, a psychiatrist, a yoga practitioner,
Interesting.
yeah, into meditation, like into all these, Eastern
Yeah.
philosophies. And so I think it really does show up in the technique. And there are some people that take the classes and aren't ready for that and don't want
Hmm.
anything and are scared of even the word spiritual, which is interesting.
Yeah.
Like what even does that mean? Because it could just mean getting to know ourselves and accept and our subconscious more, and
Yeah.
like so but yeah, so I really appreciated that
Mm.
about spirituality. And then the other thing is yes, as actors we have to take on these characters that
Yeah.
go through trauma, that these that feel these really intense emotions, and you have to go through it night after night if you're in a play 8 times a week,
Mm.
which I don't think actors should be doing,
Mm.
a tragic role eight
Mm.
times a week, but
Yeah.
that's just the way it is. um, but there are different techniques, and in more Stanislavski based technique there's something called sense memory, where the
Mm.
actor is asked to remember something, where, like, say they're playing a character that's going through a great heartache, they're asked to remember something in the actor's real life
Yeah.
where they can relate to that. And Demidov would say that that's actually taking you out of character, because in that moment I'm not King
Right.
Lear, I'm Brian, and I'm
Right.
taking myself into Brian. But also just I doesn't seem like a healthy way to do
Yeah.
it. And in Demidov's technique, it's more about being the character and using your creative imagination.
Mm.
So in Demidov, it's like when strong emotion comes, Andre would tell us to release into it. Like our body wants to tense up. And in my last episode I recorded, I talked about this chronic back pain that happened when I was on stage.
Hmm.
It was my body like bracing against, my body did not want to feel this emotion. This was after my first year of grad school, when all of a sudden acting was different than it had been before. Now real emotions were coming through me. So my body was
Yeah.
like saying it's not okay. And
Yeah.
I had this really intense chronic pain, which ended up, I went to a physical therapist. It would like get better, get worse, get better, get worse. Then she recommended the book The Way Out by Alan Gordon, which is
Hmm.
all about neuroplastic pain and how the nervous system
Okay.
can create this loop. Like maybe the pain started, maybe it was structural when it started, but then the nervous system can kind of perpetuate it and
Yeah.
keep it going. And he has these somatic tracking exercises, which I tried. And all of a sudden, I was just being curious about my pain rather than another emotion. And all of a sudden, it started
Yeah.
to dissipate. And it was like really amazing.
Yes. Yes.
But yeah, so breathing into the emotion and kind of releasing the tension and allowing the emotion to pass, even though it can be a scary emotion, is that something that you would think of it like as a healthier way of working from your
Say the
perspective?
sequence again. Say
Oh
the
yeah,
sequence again.
so I was talking about like sense memory, where the actor is,
Yep.
remembering an actual traumatic experience
Yeah.
versus in Demidov, where you're being the character and like kind of allowing your subconscious to have this experience, but also focusing on breath and just releasing your attention while the emotion is happening.
Yeah. Yeah, in the attempt to act it out, right? So to like
Yes,
kind of
yeah,
stay present with it. Yeah, I think it depends on
right.
like
Stay
what's the
present.
function, right? Like
Yeah,
I think if we're gonna I think it's about, and I run the risk of being like, oh, everything, I have a hammer, so everything's a nail, in this
right, right.
moment. But I
Yeah,
do think I've seen this so ubiquitously, but I think I think it depends on what you're going for acting, right? Like,
yeah,
because as a trauma therapist, I'm working to help people release these things. And part of it is to, like, for instance, using the breath to try to regulate through something, is going to keep people stuck in that through that. But if we're trying to just sort of manage being in that state, you could kind of breathe through it. You could for sure. I think it just depends. It just depends on, am I trying to sort of release this? And maybe that's something that actors would want to do after they're done
yeah,
versus trying to regulate or sort of manage being with the emotion re, by consciously trying to relax through the emotion,
yes,
right? As opposed to in the trauma release work that I'm doing, it's more, let's be with, because the breath will hold a lot of data, it'll hold a lot of information for us. If someone's in freeze, that's going to show up in their diaphragm and then in their breath, and then they're going to try to override that with their breath. So I think it just depends on what we're going for. That's me trying to remove trauma from people's bodies or from their brains,
right,
right? And
yeah,
or reprogram that. So if you're trying to just sort of stay present, yeah, like I'd probably be trying to look for other places in my body that felt okay, that
mhm,
if I'm in a really intense, that's something that you can do, is like just to be with the hardship of that role by also noticing what's still okay inside of you. That's probably what I would say.
mhm,
Notice where you're still loose in your body. Because people will say,
right,
if I ask you like, hey, Brian, do you have lots of tension in your body? Or like you might say to me, oh, my whole body is tense. Nobody's whole
yeah,
body is fully tense all the time. You'd be like this,
yeah,
And so it's just a matter of training people to say, wait, hang on, where do you feel it the most? Where do you feel it a little less? Oh, actually, I don't feel it so much in my left pinky toe. Okay. What would happen if you just set your attention to your left pinky toe? If I'm trying to regulate someone and kind of bring them back into capacity. So if I want to stay in a hard role and I'm doing that, again, this is not, I don't have acting experience, but I would
yeah,
imagine, right? If I'm having to do this difficult thing, it would just be like doing any hard thing
right,
that brings up your stuff. You could be running a triathlon and your body feels terrible, which I did used to do, and it's horrible and sadistic and all these things that I don't do anymore. But it's like, else in your body feels even 1% less bad? You don't have to have a word for it. You don't have to be okay. You can just like, oh, there's also this going on. And it sort of widens the brain's sort of threat detection
mhm,
microscope, that's trying to look for threat. So
yeah.
That's what I would say. I guess I would maybe amend
Great.
that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
And oh, you were talking about releasing. So
Mm.
yeah, Demidov does have a something for actors to kind of release the role after, where you're kind of
Yes.
just like in the space, just kind of casting off the role, and
Yes.
like just like physically like and like with your breath, like get it out
Yes.
of your system. And I've found that when I do that, it's it can go away. Before we wrap up, I want to mention that we unfortunately had a technical issue with our recording and lost the final portion of this conversation. But there was so much here that I wanted to share what we were able to capture. And if you enjoyed this conversation with Jenna and would like to hear us continue it, let us know. Leave a comment, send me a message, or reach out on social media. We'd love to do a follow-up conversation. And now, as always, I'd like to leave you with something to take with you. If you find yourself feeling anxious or activated before a performance, an audition, or even just a difficult moment in your day, take a moment to notice what's happening in your body. You don't have to change it or make it go away. Just notice where you're holding tension and give yourself a few slow breaths to let your body know that you don't have to solve anything right now. Thanks for listening to The Actor's Nervous System. I'm Brian Zane. You can find the podcast on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Substack. And you can follow along on Instagram at The Actor's Nervous System. If you found something useful in this episode, I'd love for you to share it with another actor, artist, or someone interested in the connection between the nervous system and creative work. Until next time, try less, listen more, and allow life to move through you.